Hi, and welcome to the 6th episode of our special podcast series on medicinal herbs. This month's topic is the role of herbs in premenstrual syndrome. Joining us this month to talk about PMS is naturopathic clinician Angela Hywood, who helpfully divides PMS symptoms into 4 main categories and associates specific herbs linked to addressing these symptoms.
We're excited to have Angela Hywood with us today, naturopath and herbalist from Australia, to talk about premenstrual syndrome, PMS. We are all probably very aware of this and have thought about many times, what do we do to control this? So, Angela, what are some of those common trends and symptoms? What do we see people experiencing during PMS?
Well, PMS can have, some wild, varied symptoms, to be honest. And I see some girls who quite literally get different symptoms each and every cycle. But what I generally like to do is sort of break them down into 4 subtypes of premenstrual syndrome. These subtypes can actually identify symptoms, and by clustering them into symptoms, it can be a really good way to help us choose diet, lifestyle, and supplemental support for those subtypes of PMS. So the first subtype of PMS that I wanted to mention was PMS-A, and A stands for anxiety. And of course, this is all about feeling more anxious and more irritable at the premenstrual time. And that can be, for some bad PMS cases, the whole luteal phase from ovulation right through. But typically it's about a week leading up to the period. And this type of anxiety can be completely crippling. Women can feel fine one moment, and then when this starts to creep in, so anxious that she doesn't want to leave the house, she gets all the autonomic nervous system signs of sympathetic dominance, like panic attacks, heart palpitations, anxiety, irritability, the mood swings, nervous tension, weepiness, paranoia, insomnia. So this type of PMS is actually quite common and probably is one of the more crippling types of PMS women can experience. So some of the types of things I start to take into consideration is that blood sugar balance, what nutritional deficiencies might be present. One of the big deficiencies here is zinc and vitamin B6. And from a hormonal perspective, I tend to see more of this anxiety presentation when women have got really high estrogen and very low progesterone. So that sort of vast canyon between the elevations of estrogen and the lows in progesterone really exacerbate anxiety. So one of the things there that we need to do is sort of help the liver clear the estrogen effectively. And this is where I absolutely love broccoli sprouts for their sulforaphane and their support of phase 2 liver detoxification. I also really love the herbs rosemary and schisandra as wonderful detoxifiers of elevated estrogen. And then to bolster up and support the health of the progesterone, there's 2 famous herbs to do that. One is called chaste tree or Vitex agnus castus, and the other is peony. And these 2 herbs help the corpus luteum from the ovaries produce much better quality and quantity of progesterone in the luteal phase. Now, one of the other sort of hidden factors I wanted to talk about with the PMS anxiety subgroup was the relationship with histamine. Histamine is such an interesting thing, and there's so much more evidence and emerging research around the role of histamine in female reproductive health. And we generally think, histamine, allergies, etc. But histamine actually can follow the patterns of estrogen. So when you see really high estrogen, you can often see very elevated histamine. And the high histamine really exacerbates irritability and anxiety. But with that will also generally come bad period pain and very heavy menstrual flow. So the high histamine symptoms that can creep into PMS, as I said, is anxiety, heavy periods, period pain, And we need to support the sort of, elimination of that high histamine with bioflavonoids, with a beautiful ancient herb called Nigella or black cumin seed. So just watch out for that link with anxiety with the histamine component. Now there's another subgroup of PMS called PMSC, PMS cravings. And this is where we've all been there, where you get hangry, you want carbs, you're looking for sugar, white flour, all the typical things we know we shouldn't be eating, but the hangry takes over, and women can get into a bit of binge eating with ice cream and cookies and hot chips and things like that. So the symptom cluster is carb and sweet cravings, headaches, fatigue, and the moodiness and irritability that goes with that. And this subgroup sort of really linked into blood sugar handling and insulin handling. So, of course, we need to support with chromium. We need to support with one of the famous blood sugar regulating herbs called gymnema. One of the other ones that, I know that a lot of Americans really love is cinnamon. And cinnamon is a beautiful herb for this subtype of PMS because it's wonderful for blood sugar handling, and it's also so nice and warming for the reproductive system. Cinnamon's not a flavour that, the Australians actually use a lot. And when I lived in America, I couldn't believe that you could buy like cinnamon gum and cinnamon this and cinnamon that.
We love our cinnamon.
Absolutely. Lovely. Now, the next subtype of PMS is PMSD, which is PMS depression. And this is when the women fall into quite a deep depressive state. So depression, memory loss, again, insomnia, confusion, teariness, withdrawal. Now, this is very much, again, associated with macronutrient imbalance. So, again, like zinc, magnesium, vitamin B6. And whereas PMS-A is more linked to high estrogen, low progesterone, the PMS-D seems to be more associated with more normal levels of estrogen but low progesterone. The way that we support this here is support the adrenals, number one, because the adrenals have such a big impact on our mental health and the function of our nervous system and brain. So some of favourite adrenal herbs of mine for this subtype is ashwagandha, romania, rhodiola. They're some of my favourites. Rhodiola is such a beautiful herb for lifting the mood and nourishing the adrenals. And then, of course, some typical herbs to support the nervous system, such as one of the famous ones, St. John's wort, for boosting the mood. At the same time here, we also need to factor in hormone balance herbs. So those two famous herbs to support progesterone, chaste tree and peony. Now, one of the other subtypes of PMS is hyperhydration, and this is PMSH, where you get lots of bloating and lots of water and fluid retention. So this is where girls complain that, their boobs go up a size or they can't get into their favourite jeans. Symptoms here are water retention, bloating, breast size increased, breast swelling, breast tenderness, weight gain. And again, this is associated with high aldosterone, blood sugar imbalance, low progesterone, and low vitamin B6. So one of our core herbs we want to take into consideration here is, of course, chaste tree and peony for boosting the progesterone. But again, from a blood sugar perspective, we definitely want to be using like cinnamon and gymnema. One of the other interesting herbs here as well is the black cumin seed or nigella, because the histamine link can be associated with the fluid here as well. So if they're exhibiting those histamine type symptoms, then factor in the black cumin seed for this type as well. So I know that was a pretty extensive explanation of symptoms of PMS, but I find it so helpful to cluster them into types in order to help us really decipher which botanicals are going to be most suitable and nutritionals most suitable for those girls.
One of the things that I found really interesting in that discussion is the emphasis on histamine. That is something I think most of us do not think about. Can you elaborate a little bit more about the histamine and the mast cells in PMS and how that's having an overall effect?
Absolutely. So, unlike allergy, where an allergic response, our mast cells and basophils release histamine, as an innate immune response in defense to something like a pollen or a dust mite. Those girls who have high histamine associated with their menstrual cycle generally lack the ability to produce an enzyme called DAO, which actually breaks histamine down. So unfortunately, there's no way we can test that out. We've got to use just our good detective, our naturopathic and holistic detective skills to figure that one out. So we think it's sort of more of a genetic or an enzyme defect with these particular individuals. So we've got to look towards symptoms. And the histamine production, as I said, mimics the patterns of estrogen, so that they're going to get more histamine load symptoms mid-cycle at ovulation and then again just premenstrually. So my giveaway detective signs of the high histamine are things like migraine, a general fluid retention and like holding a lot of excess fluid, because histamine's inflammatory and we are going to hold fluid associated with the histamine. Loose bowels, lots of cramps and sort of ovulation pain, and then, bad period pain like endometriosis is very much associated with this syndrome as well. So given that our strategy here is to support their ability to detoxify the histamine, we're mainly working on liver pathways to support them. So rosemary, schisandra are excellent in order to help support that as well. And the black cumin seed is a broad spectrum general sort of antihistamine. So it will support and stabilise the mast cells and the basophils as well. And in the United States, you have the ability to get hold of that supplement, which is DAO, which is an enzyme that dramatically helps as well. We Australian holistic practitioners actually don't have the luxury of having that available here to use, unfortunately, but you guys do, which is good. But herbs can go a long way, support phase 2 liver detoxification and stabilise the immune system. And still black cumin seed, albizia, Bakel skullcap, go high on all your bioflavonoid components, because they will help stabilise the mast cells and reduce the release of histamine. But essentially, if we want to bring it down to what really drives it, it's actually estrogen dominance and this enzymatic defect of this individual not producing enough DAO. So reduce excessive estrogen, so all of our liver strategies, and help them detoxify the excess histamine. It's a very interesting new link. It's not one that obstetricians, gynecologists take into consideration at all. So it very much falls into the sort of knowledge base and understanding of naturopathic and holistic medicine. So yeah, it's very, very interesting. Now, one of the other giveaway signs is, how in pregnancy, some girls complain of, especially in that last trimester, getting sinus issues and, congestion. Have you heard of that?
Yes. Yep.
Yep, that's a histamine sign once again. So same strategies with those girls, gently support their liver with safe herbs like schisandra and rosemary.
I think the discussion about detox and estrogen detox is really fascinating. Would you recommend a full-on detoxification program for a girl who maybe is having really severe PMS symptoms?
I don't generally, to be perfectly honest, because it's not about like, I think about a full detox program being detox of, lymphatic, liver, kidney, like it's a detox, what I would consider a full-on detox program. Where, detox is, to be honest, a word I love to hate.
Yeah, me too.
Because it's so deeply misunderstood. Now, when you've got excess hormone or excess histamine from the body, the only exit door is actually via the phase 2 liver pathways. And if the phase 2 pathways in the liver, if they've run out of nutrients or they've run out of enzymes or they're working too slowly, this is when you get the recirculation of the hormones and the recirculation of things like histamine. Instead of using the words detox, I think it's nicer to a consideration of this concept of all we're doing is filling up the pantry for the liver to run phase 2 detoxification properly. So we want to put in all the factors for, self-purification and supporting all the 5 phase 2 liver detox pathways with sufficient nutritionals and botanicals so that happens well. And if that happens well, women can conjugate estrogen and progesterone and detoxify the histamine and excrete it safely from the body.
I love that you also don't love that word, because I find like our body's detoxifying all the time. It's not that just at this, when I do this for X amount of days, then I'm detoxifying. It's just a bit of a misconception, right? So I'm happy to hear that I'm not the only one. But, people think about that often in that very narrow phase, not that it happens throughout every day in your body. Let's switch gears a little bit. There are many people who are utilizing iodine for breast pain during PMS. Are you utilizing iodine that way? And if so, how and why?
I look at directly, have they got fibrocystic breast issues? And that's the lumpiness of the breasts premenstrually. So if they've got fibrocystic breast disease or fibrocystic breast syndrome, then there is an incredible evidence basis of using iodine. There's a massive clinical study that was done in the United States that hails iodine as a revolutionary new drug for the treatment of fibrocystic breasts. So if there's lumpiness and swelling of the breast premenstrually, that's an indicator for iodine. I am very reluctant and very hesitant to go really high dose with the iodine, to be perfectly honest with you, because the reality in my clinical practice is that I've actually seen the induction of Graves' disease by using the high dose iodine therapies. Thank goodness I've been working closely with integrative medical doctors who have, we've been routinely testing to make sure the thyroid was safe. But we saw a cluster of these, and this was, some 10 years ago now, and it terrified us. And we directly saw iodine used in excess causing Graves' disease. It's a mineral that we need to be very careful with. So my strategies now with using iodine therapy for anything, but particularly fibrocystic breast, which always exacerbates premenstrually, is just to go slow and gentle repletion. I do not go over 500 micrograms of iodine per day. I will do that for 3 months. I will retest iodine levels, and I'm just using a standard urinary iodine collection as my main indicator for iodine status. So I've moved away from, the more of the Brownstein protocols of the very high dose iodine therapy, because unfortunately I've seen some, a cluster of consequence of iodine toxicity, and it's scary when you see that.
For sure.
Slowly does it with iodine. Go gentle, go slow, small doses, and just take your time to replete them and watch the breast symptoms improve.
Can you talk a little bit about progesterone and wild yam creams for PMS, or even taking wild yam as a supplement for PMS?
Absolutely. So I fondly like to call this the wild yam scam. So there's a lot of misconception about, wild yam. Now, first of all, let me tell you about wild yam as a herb and how a herbalist would traditionally use it. So wild yam is a herb that we use as an estrogen support herb. It interacts with the hypothalamus to convince the hypothalamus there's a little more estrogen around than there actually is. There is absolutely no phytochemicals in wild yam that are progesterogenic or have an influence on progesterone directly in any way. So this is why I call it the wild yam scam. If you get some wild yam extract and mix it into a cream and lather your body lovingly in wild yam cream, it is not going to donate progesterone to your body. Now, where the confusion comes in is there is a yam, and it's called the Mexican yam, that some scientists got hold of. They had a look at the phytochemicals. I extracted one called dioscin. They were able to then, in a laboratory, convert that phytochemical over to a progesterone analog. And then they put that in the cream and called it natural wild yam cream as a progesterone support. However, our body can't do that. Our body can't convert that raw material into progesterone just by simply rubbing it on the skin. Even if it got into the bloodstream, it doesn't act that way. So all of these so-called natural wild yam or progesterone creams, they belong firmly in the camp of pharmaceutical medicine because they're pharmaceutically manipulated to produce progesterone. So I hope that's clarified that for you, because it is, again, something that I almost can't believe it's been misconstrued so badly and people think it's natural when it's actually not. It's like more bioidentical hormones, and it just happens to be a plant that they get the original source of, that they chemically manipulate in a laboratory to then, act as a progesterone analog.
That does clear up, because many people have, this misconception. What about taking wild yam as an herbal supplement? Where do you see that in women's health as a whole?
So wild yam is a beautiful herb to increase low estrogen. So this is why it's quite popular in herbal formulations for perimenopause or menopausal years, because the phytochemicals in wild yam act to support endogenous estrogen production. It's appropriate and great to use more so in women in their mid-30s to 40s, when you're journeying into your perimenopausal years and through menopause. It's great, but it does not have an influence on progesterone. It has an influence on being a modulator or a balancer of estrogen. Wild yam's also a typical herb we use for period pain because it's an antispasmodic as well. So period pain and low estrogen are the two things that we typically would use wild yam for.
One question that I've been bubbling around, and personally over the course of my life, that migraine associated or headache associated PMS, what do you think is appropriate herbal and nutritional treatments for those women who suffer from that within the categories? I kind of think that fits into probably A and C and many others within your definitions in the beginning.
Absolutely. So the headache and the migraine scenarios with premenstrual syndrome, that's when I really want you to come back and think about histamine, okay? So, blood sugar balance has absolutely got to be taken into consideration. So, really clean, healthy eating. Unfortunately, at the time that women generally don't crave clean, healthy eating.
Right.
So support blood glucose regulation, gymnema, and again, cinnamon are two of my favourites. Support and soften histamine. So the black cumin seed is a very interesting plant here because not only does it support, balance and down regulation of the histamine, but it's incredible for blood glucose support at the same time. So I know that black cumin seed's not a herb that we naturally think about for, women's health, PMS and hormones, but it's something I would really love you to keep front of mind. And of course, with, headaches, migraines around premenstrual time as well, our liver's calling out to us and asking for some support for helping clear the hormones through that phase 2 liver pathway and eliminate them from the body. So once again, from a botanical perspective, how do we support phase 2? I'm not going to call it detoxification. I'm going to call it elimination. Phase 2 elimination of hormones. And we do that with the beautiful rosemary and schisandra and milk thistle. But don't forget Mother Nature's true gift to the liver for helping to synthesize hormones well, and that's broccoli sprouts. So I absolutely love the use of things like broccoli sprouts for improving the sulfation pathway in phase 2 of the liver. So there's some of my hot tips for clearing the headaches and the migraines premenstrually.
That's great. I probably needed those about 10 years ago. I'm more probably into the wild yam phase at this point, but So what is your go-to herbal protocol for a better, healthier luteal phase of the PMS? What would you think about that?
Yeah, it's, to be honest, to clear PMS, it's all about having a healthy luteal phase. And I always say, if we back it up, luteal phase, so from ovulation through to period, is actually only going to be as good as the health of the follicular phase, the pre-ovulatory phase. So let's just back it up a little bit and talk about the follicular phase. So from day 1 of your period through to ovulation, that phase is all about estrogen synthesis. If your estrogen's too high, you can ovulate too early, the oocyte or the egg then isn't mature, you get an early ovulation with a small egg, and therefore you get a small corpus luteum. So we've got to remember all the progesterone for the luteal phase is produced by the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum is a consequence of ovulation. You ovulate, that little sac that it pops out of from the ovary, flips up inside out, turns into a progesterone-producing gland for the second half of the cycle. So if you ovulate early with an immature egg and the corpus luteum's not strong and robust, then we can't actually expect it to produce perfect, beautiful, balanced progesterone in that luteal phase. So one of Mother Nature's most exquisite herbs for balancing the estrogen in the follicular phase is black cohosh, a traditional North American herb that, we found out about from the North American Indians. So black cohosh is a selective estrogen receptor modulator. If your estrogen's too high, it'll bring it down. If it's too low, it'll upregulate it and balance it up. So it's such a safe herb to be using for estrogen balance. Okay, once we've balanced the estrogen in the pre-ovulatory phase and we've ovulated, then our focus is, okay, what can we do to support the health of that corpus luteum and help that corpus luteum produce, really high quality, beautiful progesterone for that post-ovulatory phase. So this is where it's really important to use chaste tree, white peony or peony, as herbs. They have research to show that they actually support the production of progesterone from that corpus luteum directly and the health of that corpus luteum. And also we want to plug in magnesium and vitamin B6 because they also support healthy progesterone production from the corpus luteum. So we want to use a strategy that encompasses some support all cycle long. And I'll typically use a combination of black cohosh, chaste tree and peony as my 3 major herbs, all cycle through to support and reduce those PMS symptoms. So that in my opinion, from 20 years of clinical practice, is the simplest but most effective way to support a really healthy luteal phase.
Thank you. That's so helpful to think through that whole process. As we end our conversation today, what are some of the key things that, from a global perspective, that women should think about as they're dealing with PMS, and which are those really knockout herbs you want to bring forward again?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, in this day and age, I think that women, and I think we'll all agree, we juggle too much. We forget about how critically important our adrenals and nervous system are in influencing our female hormones. So, even if you put, chaste tree and peony in, if there's a lot of stress factor, high cortisol, a lot of tax on the autonomic nervous system, women are still not going to feel great premenstrually. So I think we need to take a step back and actually look at our, spiritual health, our mental health, our biochemical health, our health from all different perspectives, and take a step back and say, what is our body asking us? If we're feeling anxious and irritable, our body's asking us to retreat, to step back and to slow down. If we're feeling, hungry and craving carbohydrates and things like that, our body is asking us to, again, slow down, eat differently, be mindful. So I guess from a global perspective, look, the herbs and our nutritionals play a critical part, but they're not override that stress factor. And one thing that's a common thread that I see with 99% of the women here in my clinical practice is life is stressful. We juggle too much. We don't take our self-care into a priority consideration. And until we actually get that life balance part, at least to be front of mind, not a lot's going to shift. So it's about slowing down, it's about taking some time, and it's about listening to what your body is asking you to do. If you're anxious, your body's asking you to take some rest and take some retreat and turn off from the world. And that's easily enough done. That's what meditation does for us. So 10 or 15 minutes of mindful breathing or meditation can be as powerful as the strongest herb or the strongest drug to help create some calm and peace at this time.
I think that's beautifully said. We a lot of times just need to listen to our bodies, right, to do the right thing. So I appreciate this wonderful conversation about women's health and how we can be better about just taking care of ourselves and how nutrients and herbs can make that difference. So thank you again, Angela, for this great conversation. And I always look forward to having you on and available to have these great conversations. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to talking to you again next time. Thanks so much.
For more on medicinal herbs, check out the other episodes of this series, covering topics like immunity, sleep, and bitter herbs. Visit WholisticMatters.com to learn more. That's holistic with a W.